We are not doing tax returns. We are not preparing financial statements. We are having conversations about what your practice is showing us with the numbers. And is that what you want? Or do you want something different to be happening in your practice? And if so, how do we get there?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Raving Patients Podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Len Tao. To begin, I want to thank my sponsors, both Dental Intelligence and the Doc Sites, for their support. And I also want to remind everyone about my event, which is September 29th and 30th. It's called Supercharge Your Dental Practice. It is a business and marketing boot camp. We're focused on marketing your practice and the business side of dentistry. We've got 18 speakers, 14 hours of continuing education at the Opal Grand Resort, an amazing hotel on the beach in Delray Beach, Florida. Can't get any better than that. If you want information on it, check out www.superchargeyourdentalpractice.com and use the code RAVING, R-A-V-I-N-G, to save $100 on registration. Speaking of my event, this episode is with one of my speakers. Her name is Jessica Nunn. The episode is called Making Dollars and Cents of Your Dental Practice, and she is from Maven Financial. So please welcome to the Raving Patients Podcast, Jessica Nunn. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
So Jessica Nunn is the founder of Maven Financial Partners, who take pride in her experience helping business owners increase their financial awareness. Jessica launched her career as a CPA in Big Four public accounting firms, preparing tax returns for high net worth business owners. Later, at middle market accounting firms, she provided financial planning, business consulting, and tax planning strategy to small business and their owners. Her years of experience and attentive service to her clients have been instrumental in forming Maven Financial Partners. Over the course of her career, Jessica has built trust with her clients by making the complex simple. She delivers financial solutions that are meaningful and advice that is relevant to her clients' lives and businesses. So thank you for that short bio. I like reading when they're short. It's a little bit more complicated when it's longer. So Jessica, why don't you expand on your bio a little bit? Talk to the listeners and the viewers about how you help dental practices.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Sometimes listening to your bio, you're like, oh, I guess that is me. But the reality is that I am a CPA. I tell people I'm a recovering CPA, as you've heard me say. Lived in the CPA world, preparing tax returns, helping people with financials for a long time, but realized like what I like doing the most is helping people understand their business and, walk through the financial aspects of what's happening in their business. So formed Maven Financial several years ago, and we help dental offices as almost like a CFO. So, you've got your bookkeeper and your accountant, and they're recording what already happened in the practice. But our role is to help you think about taking that information and making a plan and thinking about the future. Why are these things happening in the practice, and how can we make our practice more profitable or more whatever it is you want it to be?
So I want to be very clear here because I think it's an important distinction. You mentioned there's a bookkeeper, there's CPAs, and then there's you. So can you talk I know you mentioned it briefly. Can you touch base on those differences and how you fit into that puzzle?
Honestly, we work super closely with our clients' bookkeepers. So typically a bookkeeper or your accountant is the one who's doing your QuickBooks. They're recording your transactions. They're making sure that your bank accounts are reconciled and you have a profit and loss statement that's accurate and a balance sheet that's accurate, right? Then oftentimes we have a different person who's a CPA who is preparing our tax return. Right. And so ideally, our bookkeeper or accountant is preparing our financial statements every month, and you're looking at those. And then your tax return is prepared every year. But what happens a lot of times is we're not having meaningful conversations about the future of our practice. Sometimes folks will have those with their CPA, but oftentimes what we hear is that their CPA is like working on tax returns for 6 months out of the year, and they're not available, or they're too busy, or, they just don't oftentimes have the ability to switch into that forward thinking mode. Not all of them. Some are very good about being strategic, but that is all that we do. We are not doing tax returns. We are not preparing financial statements. We are having conversations about what your practice is showing us with the numbers. And by the numbers, we're referring to, we're going to look at your profit and loss. We're going to look at your balance sheet. We're going to look at your cash flow. And then we're also going to look at key performance indicators. So how is your revenue being generated? Who's doing what and how? And is that what you want, right? Or do you want something different to be happening in your practice? And if so, how do we get there?
I think that's a very distinct difference to make there's a difference between what a bookkeeper does, which is record it, what a CPA does, which is create the tax returns, and then you analyze it and basically tell them how to do better at what they're doing. I think that's a really great distinction. And I wanted to really make sure people understood that there's a definite need for you in almost every practice out there.
We believe so. I mean, we love what we do, and it's so fun to get onto the phone or get on our Zoom meetings and say, hey, here's what happened. And most of our clients are like, I know, I was feeling it. Like I was feeling that the schedule wasn't as full, or I was feeling that we were so productive and the schedule was amazing. And now you're showing that actually, because I had a month like that, this was my profit in that month and we met our goals. And, you know, you guys know deep down inside when things are working, but revealing it to you in the numbers is a fun thing.
So let's jump into some of the content regarding what we wanted to talk about in the episode. What are some of the current financial trends that you're seeing in the dental industry?
What's interesting is last year was the year of costs being super high, right? We know our supplies were high, our payroll was high. Like we saw payroll costs higher than ever before last year in our dental practices. We have the ability actually with our access to data to benchmark all of our practices. So we're able to see, you know, how do all of our practices stack up against each other in terms of payroll, in terms of supplies, in terms of their fixed costs. And what we can see is that the last year payroll, these costs, as you know, were extremely high, right? We were paying people more than ever before. We were paying for our supplies higher than ever before. This year, we're seeing the trend revert back to a more normal state, which has been so, like, thank goodness. You know, I'm so happy to see that practices are absorbing these costs better. Supplies are coming down faster than what I've seen before. We have some clients with supplies less than 4% of their collections, which is crazy to me. And I think the reason is that we've learned that, okay, the supply chain is back into normal motion, right? We don't have to order 8 months of inventory like we used to have to. And we got more creative about ordering quickly. And I think people are just being really smart about ordering supplies when they need them and not overstocking their shelves. Number 2, payroll. Staffing is still a challenge, right? I don't have a single practice, I don't think, that would say we have all of the employees that we need. All of them are short, at least a dental hygienist or a dental assistant somewhere. We're short on staff. And I hope that we can resolve that because it's really causing some problems. But I will say that our practices so far this year are more productive than ever before. And when your practice is productive and busy, it makes your payroll as a percentage come down. And we're seeing that time and time again. So, you know, I know that our clients are worried like, oh, I'm having to pay people more than ever before. Yesterday in a meeting, we were talking about, do I pay hygienists a signing bonus? Like I've never heard that in my career. Is that really what we're thinking about doing right now? But shoot, if it takes it to get someone in the door to take care of your patients, we're going to have to do it. But the good news is that our payroll as a percentage of income is starting to normalize and come down. Right now, our practice is blended. It's about 29%, which I've always said I like payroll at 25%, but anything below 30 right now, I'll take it. But, you know, make sure that you know where your payroll is as a percentage of your income and see if you're coming in higher or lower than what our practices are seeing.
So the first trend was you saw that this year there was a decrease in the cost for a practice. And number 2 was that the payroll costs were somewhere you said in a 30, you said usually it should be I want to go somewhere real quick once I ask this question for you, but you said the payroll numbers have you said spread out a little or have come down a little bit.
I think as a dollar, they're probably just as high as they were last year. But what we're seeing is practices are busier right now, right? We have fewer cancellations. We have fuller schedules. So we're absorbing those costs better. So as a percentage, they're getting into a little bit better of alignment. Last year, 2022, on average, our practices were spending over 30%, which is like, hurts my heart to say, right? I don't love that for anybody, but we're starting to come back down to more normal.
If you had to pinpoint the golden nugget number for where someone's practice overhead should be in an ideal world, what number would that be at?
Okay, well, first we have to define overhead. And the reason is that owner doctors will pay themselves according to usually whatever their CPA says makes sense for taxes, right? So you're not paying yourself like an associate. You're not paying yourself based on your production. So when I speak in terms of overhead, I remove all of the doctor's salaries, whether it's you, whether it's an associate, any of those salaries. I also remove your perks. Like you want to run your car through? Great. I love it for taxes. I don't love it for calculating your overhead. So I'm going to remove that. I also don't include your debt payments. And the reason is I know it's a bill you're paying, but it's on your balance sheet. It's not on your P&L. So I want to be clear that when I'm looking at overhead, it's your team salaries, your lab, supplies, in your like operational costs. Okay. So rule of thumb, those things added up should be in a healthy practice about 60% of collections.
So 60% of collections. Okay. And if you had to break it down by section, obviously the highest cost is going to be payroll. So where do you want to find that at?
I want that to be 25%.
And does that include 401k and benefits as well? Or that's...
Yep. Just for the staff though, not any doctor benefits, not doctor 401k, not doctor insurance, right? Now, people are like, no way you're getting staff payroll at 25% these days. And I will agree that it's been, 29, 30% in a lot of cases, but we do have clients that are able to do it. It can be done. And for your practice, look, another thing, don't get married to these figures, right? What we like to tell people is, what's the best benchmark for you and for your practice? So spend some time to think about that. Where have you been historically? Where do you want to be? We had a client yesterday, amazing, successful dentist. His payroll will be 30%. We're just going to accept it and move on, right? But ideally, 25.
Well, remember, before we even get into these numbers, there's only a couple ways to make more money. You either raise your fees, which is hard to do if you're an insurance practice, or decrease your expenses. So, but if you raise your fees and you're making more money and you're busy and productive, that overhead is going to come down because you're making more money. So that's how you get your payroll costs down to a lower level.
That's our favorite way to do it. It's not going to make sense for you to come in and be like, you're out. I can't afford you. I need my percentage lower, right? You have to figure out what's the amount of revenue required to pay for this team, to pay for this space, to pay for these things. And that's how we do that.
Payroll's 25%. Then we move on to like rent or mortgage or whatever you do there.
Let's do it like this. Lab and supplies is the other cost that might vary based on your revenue, right? Because as you collect more, your lab and supplies will go up. So we call those variable expenses. And I tend to blend those for purposes of benchmarking because some of you guys are milling your own crowns. It kind of depends on what you got going on. I like that at 15%. So in kind of a practice where you're using an outside lab, 9% for the lab, 6% for your supplies. I'm telling you what, though, we're seeing supplies at less than 4% right now. I'm like, are you guys paying your bills? Are you stealing these things? What's happening? But we're seeing it lower and lower. And honestly, I don't like the lab low unless you have an in-house lab, because that tells me that you're doing enough restorative work, right?
Right. You're not doing the big procedures either. So when I was, now again, I sold my practice, 18 months ago now. And, they were questioning my lab. I remember when they were looking at the P&L, they were questioning the lab bills, but I did a ton of big cases, a lot of implant cases, and I did a lot of Invisalign, and Invisalign is a hefty lab bill on that.
Oh, for sure.
So I was saying, my lab was high, but it's for a specific reason. I'm doing bigger cases. So I think that has to be some variable numbers there as well. So 25% for payroll, combined lab and supplies, you want about 15%. So you've got 40 of the 60% there.
That leaves 20% to pay all of the other costs of your practice, which we usually, we'll look at those individually, but as long as the total is 15%, we're generally happy. Like, rule of thumb is your rent should be about 5%, right? Usually you've got professional fees in there, about 2%, maybe computer, another percent. And then it kind of, you've got small things in there that makes up the rest of it. But that 20% for your, what we call fixed expenses, those are the expenses that they don't care. Your rent does not care how many patients walked in the door that day, right? It's not going to be higher or lower based on your volume. So those are your fixed costs. We want that to be 20%. So that leaves you with 40 cents to pay all yourself, right? Your own perks, your own benefits, your own debt, all those things.
Now, out of curiosity, I don't know how many exact clients you work with, but that's the point is, of your clients that you currently work with, what percentage of your clients are above or below 60% in terms of their overhead?
This year, most are approaching 40% if they're not there. I will say 60% in terms of overhead, 40% in terms of profitability. I would say if they're not, we have a very clear path to get there. We know exactly what we need to do to get there. We know exactly how much the doctor, any associates, and the hygiene team needs to produce to get there. So I think that's kind of a relief when we can say, listen, like we said, your expenses are not your problem. Let's grow your practice to fit these expenses. And here is a clear plan on who needs to do what so that you can make the profitability that we know that your practice can produce.
And that makes a lot of sense to me because, when we did our Facebook Live a few weeks ago, we had talked about how dental office owners don't know their numbers very well. Like, this is a very important part of running your business, is to know what your expenses are and what percentage is your overhead, because everything revolves around that. If you're at 80, 75% overhead, not including the doctors, you're like overpaying for things. Whereas if you're, 50%, you're doing really well. So some people wouldn't even know that because they don't know what their numbers are. They don't even know what their staff salaries are comparatively. So this is one of the things that dental practice owners have to know to be really successful. Now, I'm curious, again, obviously people hire you to learn this. What percentage of the people that hire you actually know these numbers before you get involved with them?
You're not wrong. Most people don't. Some people do, but most people don't. But here's what actually happens. It's the first time we meet with them, they're freaking out. And they have said the words to me, it feels like I'm getting naked right now. Like, you are seeing everything and I'm freaking out a little bit right now. But we make it, we're like normal, real people. We get it. We understand that you're going to have challenges. Listen, if your practice was perfect, you wouldn't need to call me. So I love helping people come from that place of maybe they're nervous, they're uncomfortable, they don't like talking about their numbers, to a place of becoming excited about our meetings. And they'll tell us, this is my favorite meeting of the month. And I'm like, who would have thought, right? Remember the first time we met, you were freaking out about revealing all of this data to me and so embarrassed and saying, I'm embarrassed by this. I don't know. And we make it uplifting. We make it motivating. My job is for you to hang up and know exactly what you need to do to create the practice that you want. Like, that's it.
All right. So now moving on from the overhead part of it, let's talk about the key performance indicators that someone needs to know, they need to understand, and they need to pay attention to. Otherwise, their practice could be, problematic and they don't even know it.
It's a really good spinoff from the overhead, because if your overhead is or isn't in line with what we say, the question is it doesn't just happen to be there, right? Like, how does it get there? How are you generating, or what does it take in revenue to make your profit where it needs to be? And that comes by reviewing the KPIs, key performance indicators. So obviously, you want to understand your collections. You want to understand your production. You want to understand your adjustments. But more than that, you want to know what every provider is producing. And we like to look at it per the hour. So what is every doctor bringing in per hour, right? What are they producing per hour? What are they working, right? It's amazing to me how we hang up and, clients will say, oh my gosh, what happened to my collections? And I'll say, well, you were gone for 2 weeks. Like, what's happening when you're gone? No one's working, but we have to plan for that. And we have to predict that. And we have to watch it. And we have to measure it. So production, collection, we track new patients. I know that's big for you. We also have been looking at retention, like how many patients are you recapturing? How many patients are kind of falling out of your active patient list? So really, we want to measure and track anything that's going to move the needle for your practice, so that the end result is to drive the profitability. And I know sometimes it's uncomfortable and some folks are like, I don't want to just be always talking about production, like production. Like, we're here just taking care of patients. I don't want it to always feel like money. But here's the reality, is that measuring your production per hour is another way of measuring how well and efficiently we're taking care of our patients. If our job is to do dentistry on patients and they're coming to us because they need that and they want that, if we're able to do that by diagnosing it, right? By getting them to accept treatment, by getting the treatment scheduled, completed, and paid for, isn't that not what we were here to do anyway? So it's just truly a measurement of how we're doing what we're here to do anyway. In the second reality is that in order to take care of your patients and your team and your family, you have to be looking at your revenue. You have to be looking at the profitability. It is a business.
Right. And you did mention that I'm very aware, and I always go over new patient numbers with practices, because that shows you whether the practice is obviously attracting new patients. But it's amazing when I ask people how many patients are leaving through the back door, they have no idea. And, especially because you could be attracting, 20, 30 new patients a month, but if 40 or 50 are leaving and not coming back, your practice is retracting, not growing. And I think that's a huge, huge thing that people have no clue about.
For sure. And, it kind of depends too. Like, some of our practices are, I don't want to say intentionally shrinking, but I do want to say that. Like, maybe you're so busy that you can't get all your patients in, but who should we be keeping and who should be, be purposefully maybe letting go or not having come back? Maybe we're dropping insurance or whatever that might be. But you got to make sure you understand who's leaving and not coming back. And a lot of practices too will say, I'm hiring this associate. I know it's the right thing. They're amazing. I love them, but how do I keep them busy? Well, it's interesting to look and see you have a lot of existing patients in your patient database. You just need to get them back in the door, right? Don't let them go so long that they leave you.
100% agree with you. Let's talk about things that you're seeing in the industry or through your meetings with clients that have become challenges. What concerns you in the industry?
It's still the staffing thing. Like, it's crazy to me how we've, I think, shrunk the workforce for dental, not necessarily on the provider side, although I do have clients that would love to have an associate right now that can't find one, but it's definitely within the hygiene team and the dental assistant team. I will say it kind of is different in different parts of the country. Some areas are having a better time with that. Some areas are having a harder time with that. But, I would just encourage your listeners to take care of the team you do have. Let's really develop and have a great culture and pay people what they should be paid to keep our team, making the investment in the team. If you're going to overspend anywhere on their P&L, please let it be your team. It's going to be super important to keeping your practice going. I just literally, right before we hopped on, read an article about a practice who had to shut down because they had no team. That's the reason we're closing our doors, but I can believe it, right? That's the challenge that we're seeing, the biggest challenge. The other challenge that I feel is getting better is these cancellations. Folks will say, my schedule starts full, starts out amazing, everything is great, and then half of the schedule cancels out. I think we've created a culture through COVID where we're allowing our patients to take control over whether they're showing up or not. We just need to get back to explaining how important the appointment is and that we've reserved the time and all those. But those are very operational and clinical things that we use the financials to diagnose. That's our x-ray, right? I say, oh my gosh, your hygiene, everyone was working, but your production was down way more than last month. Your patients per day were down way more than usual. Are you having a lot of cancellations? It's like I have an 8-ball. They're like, oh my gosh, how'd you know? Or a magic ball, I guess. So it's interesting that we can use the numbers to diagnose the challenges, but those are the two main ones that we're seeing really prevalent right now.
Got it. No, those were kind of prevalent when I was still in practice, so that really hasn't changed that much. It's a couple of reasons why I hated being a dental practice owner was dealing with those things. Those challenges were crazy sometimes. So, can you kind of talk me through really how you kind of get started with a client? So more so, talk to the viewers and listeners, why would someone need you? Talk to them about where you're going. I know you're going to diagnose and help them, but a lot of people say, well, that my CPA does that. So can you just kind of talk about, I know we talked a little briefly in the beginning, but talk about where your space is in the industry.
Yeah, I would say, some folks say their CPA does that. In some cases, that might be true. You found a great CPA who can do that planning for you. But I would say, do you have a very clear plan for every provider? Does everyone know how much they need to produce to drive the profitability that you would like? Are you aware of the KPIs that you need to reach? Do you know where your money is coming from? Do you know who's doing what and how to generate your collections? Do you know where your expenses are compared to where they should be? But most importantly, does every month in the foreseeable future for the next 12 to 18 months have a very clear path and a very clear plan? How great would it be to say, I know that at the end of October, I'm going to have $78,000 in my checking account. If I reach all these goals, then I also know at that moment I can afford to go buy this piece of equipment because I've either saved for it or planned for it or prepared, my practice for it. Just being able to have the foresight to understand where you should be and where, you can expect to be, to me, I've heard it. It's we're relieving stress. We're providing for sleep at night. It's just so helpful to have that person in your corner who can help you make these decisions along the way. You guys got a lot of things to worry about. Let us help you narrow it down and, keep you off of that island where you feel like you're doing it alone.
Thank you for explaining that, because I think it was important to kind of, again, find your role or your position within the practice. I wanted to ask you if there's any other key points or key discussions that you wanted to have before we switch to the next section.
Despite the challenges that are going on, I think right now is a great time to be a dentist. We're seeing, like I said, profitability increase this year over last year. I think, coming over the challenges of COVID and everything that brought to everybody. I love the industry. I'm not a dentist, but I love the industry. And I would just, reassure you guys that I think right now continues to be a great time to be a dentist.
So let's switch gears for about 5 minutes or so, real quick. You don't have to go into really long, drawn out answers, whatever comes to your mind first. Okay. So what do you think is your unique skill that helped you become successful?
I would say the ability to connect with people.
Okay. If you had one piece of advice to someone just starting out in the dental industry, what would it be?
Learn all you can and surround yourself with a great team who can support you.
What have you read online recently that inspired you?
What have I read online recently? Oh, geez. And I want everyone to know I did not know these questions were coming. This is truly like off the cuff. There's no studying involved. What did I read online that inspired me? Oh gosh, I read so many things online. What's interesting is scrolling Facebook, all these messages about Father's Day and people supporting their dads. And I think that that's been really great that, we take the time to recognize the dads that have helped us get where we are.
What eats up most of your time that you'd like to change?
I just recently developed something where I note down if I'm working on something and I either don't enjoy it or I'm not good at it, I want to note it so I can get rid of those. As much as any business owner does not enjoy dealing with solidifying processes and getting the team on board with new process changes, that's something we've been going through over the past couple of days. That is not my favorite thing, but I will do it.
Okay. Do you have a hard time telling people no?
I used to. I don't so much anymore.
How do you capture and keep track of ideas? Do you keep notebook? Do you have voice memos?
We have what we call an issues list. We follow EOS traction. So for business, we have an issues list where we keep track of the things that we want to do one day, but we can't do it all today. Got it.
Okay. This is a tough question. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. If you had to open up a lemonade stand tomorrow, what would you call your stand?
I'm the worst at naming names, so I'd probably call it Jessica's Lemonade Stand.
That's the fastest anybody's ever answered that question. So that's good. What book do you recommend people read or reread as it has made a great impact on you the first time?
I would say business-wise traction. I mean, I told you that we follow EOS. It's an operating system for businesses, and it just really keeps you on track and prioritized. So if you're running a business, give that one a read.
What have you learned from the most successful person you know?
Spending time developing your leadership qualities really can go a long way and drive your success. I just feel like it's your team, right? That as a business owner supports your success. So I think just learning everything I can and looking at how other successful people are being good leaders.
Do you have a favorite business podcast?
Well, I enjoy your podcast. I enjoy lots of dental podcasts. I don't necessarily have a favorite business podcast. I have some personal podcasts that I listen to. And honestly, I wasn't a podcaster until very recently when, walking around the neighborhood, listening to podcasts and sometimes laughing out loud and wondering what these neighbors must think.
And then last but not least, what is one subscription you cannot live without?
Amazon.
Amazon is a popular answer. Netflix is a popular answer. So actually, it's Amazon Prime, technically, is what you
That's the one for me, too. Yeah, for sure.
Because Amazon's not you don't pay a subscription for that. You're paying the monthly for Amazon Prime. Jessica, someone's listening to this podcast and wants to learn more about how you can help them. What is the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. So we're available at hello@Maven, Maven, FP, like financialpartners.com, mavenfp.com. We're also on Instagram. We're pretty active on Instagram with videos and things that we're kind of seeing going on with our clients that we'd like to share. Maven Financial. Same with Facebook, but just shoot us an email. Also for your listeners, we're happy to do what we call a complimentary financial assessment. You want to know where your overhead stacks up against these numbers? We're happy to look at your profit and loss with you, like a CFO, help you kind of see, where you align against the others.
Make sure you mention the Raving Patients podcast when you reach out to Jessica and her team, and she'll do a complimentary evaluation of your practice.
We sure will.
Perfect. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. This was very enlightening. I'm sure the listeners and the viewers will be enlightened too, considering that most of them do not know their information, even though I've been beating into their brains for 3 or 5 years or 6 years since I've had the podcast that they have to know their numbers. As I alluded to during our Facebook Live, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank, and Shark Tank teaches you cannot be successful without knowing your numbers. You have to know this. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise in this. I look forward to you speaking at Supercharger Dental Practice September 29th and 30th. In Delray Beach, Florida. So Jessica's one of our featured speakers there, and I'm excited to have her spend 45 minutes with the attendees. If you like this episode, please share it. Please let your colleagues know. Please ask them to download and subscribe to the episodes as well. And as I end all of my podcasts, remember, your reputation matters. Until next time, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll talk to everyone soon.